Hello, Paul speaking.
Yeah, hello, hi, it's Fauzia here. I think we had few emails today in the morning.
Hello, Fatbia, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Yourself?
I'm very good, thank you.
Yeah, and just to confirm that you know that I'm recording this conversation.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, just like I said, my name is Fauzia Kali, and I'm a first year student at CIT, soon to be MTU.
Yes.
We have a project in one of our modules, and is to promote the 17 goals of sustainable development that were picked up by United Nations.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the agenda of 2030. I'm a little bit nervous, so I'm so sorry about this. So I was wondering if we could just have a chat about your organization and maybe just introduce yourself and what you are doing at the moment before we start.
Okay. Paul Sheehan is my name. I'm Head of Campaigns and Communications at Cork Simon Community.
Mm-hmm.
So my job is focused on mostly our advocacy work, and it also in external relations and our internal communications. Cork Simon will be marking its 50th anniversary next year, so it's been around for quite a long time. We were founded in 1971 by the founder of the Simon community, Alton Wallach Clifford. Anton was a probation officer in London in the 60s, and he was very struck by the number of Irish people he met in the course of his work.
Okay.
So he travelled to Dublin in 1969 to see where all the Irish people were coming from, and then helped found the Simon community there. And he did the same for Cork in 1971. A small group of volunteers invited him over, and they started Cork Simon Community. The very first project was a soup run, so it was food for rough sleepers, and that project has stayed in place right throughout the last 50 years and still operates today.
Okay.
Also back in 1971, it was the first time that the number of people sleeping rough in Cork City was counted, and again, that's something we do pretty much every week. We've grown, obviously, since 1971, so we've got a range of services for people experiencing homelessness, everything from the soup run that I mentioned. We have an outreach team that works proactively with people sleeping rough, and also in trying to prevent homelessness. We have emergency accommodation. We have housing services, both independent living housing and high support housing, which is shared housing for people with very high support needs. We have addiction treatment and aftercare services, and we have an employment and training service. So it covers a lot of ground these days.
Okay, that's a lot to hear, because once you go into the page, you kind of don't get all that information. So that is very good, and I think the group will be very happy to hear all the history that you have just said here.
Great.
So, like now with COVID, how has that impacted the organization? We'll say.
Could you repeat that again?
With COVID-19.
Yes.
Have you had any impact? Has that impacted the organization, like maybe in terms of maybe donations of volunteers or stuff like that?
It has. It has had a huge positive and negative impact.
Okay.
So, from the negative point of view, I suppose back in March, anxiety levels amongst people using our services was raised significantly, and there was a lot of fear around contracting COVID-19.
Yeah.
And just bear in mind that many people using our services would be very much in the vulnerable category, so would be very susceptible to catching this, and it would potentially have a significant impact on their health. We had to reduce capacity at some of our services so that we could keep people as safe and protected as possible. So where we had 2 people to a room in our emergency shelter, they are now all single occupancy rooms. We have an additional emergency accommodation service, which is essentially 18 mattresses on the floor of one of our buildings. We had to reduce capacity there to ensure social distancing. But the plus side of that is, with fewer people in our emergency shelter, it gave the care staff there a lot more time to spend with each person. A lot more time to focus on their issues and to find solution to their issues. And the emergency shelter is a much calmer place. So our emergency shelter is described as a low threshold service. So that is people with very complex needs, a drug addiction, alcohol addiction, poor mental health, quite often traumatic experiences, quite often disconnected from their family, quite often disadvantaged from a very young age. And you've got a concentration of people in a small enough building, you know, it can be challenging. So from that point of view, COVID-19 helped us to ease the pressure there and to, as I say, spend more time with people. It's not a case that, you know, people who lost their bed didn't have anywhere to go. We worked a lot more closely than normal with HSE Social Inclusion and with Cork City Council, and their relationships that have become even stronger as a result of COVID-19, and our working relationships with them are continuing in that vein. And they managed to, you know, secure emergency accommodation in B&Bs for the people who, you know, weren't able to go to the shelter. So that's been very positive. From a fundraising point of view, it's very difficult to say right now. COVID-19 had, you know, we had to cancel all of our community events. And that's a significant amount of money per year. So, for example, we had to cancel our annual fundraising ball, which usually happens in April. And that's a significant fundraiser for us. So that was just cancelled. Right now, we don't know if we can hold it in 2021. We have a lot of different events that people hold throughout the year: coffee mornings, dinners, get-togethers. Obviously, it involves people getting together, and that's just not possible. So that kind of area of fundraising is closed off to us. We had significant additional costs through the use of, you know, having to buy PPE, personal protective equipment, for all our staff. And that's an ongoing cost, obviously. And from a volunteering point of view, which, you know, we're very conscious of, we were founded by volunteers. It's one of our core values. But obviously, you know, we have had to curtail the number of volunteers who've been able to volunteer on our services, again, just from health and safety grounds and to facilitate social distancing and other safety measures. So that has had an impact. And, you know, it will be particularly felt now over Christmas when, you know, we'd have even more volunteers than usual going into our congregate settings or into the emergency shelter and helping to create a festive atmosphere. But that will be gone this year. So you know, that is an impact.
That's that. It had a plus and a negative there. And I understand that. And so you mentioned about having vulnerable people. So will that be in your case there? Do you have more of female, you think, male, young, older, or, you know?
Well, all of our services are for adults 18 years and older and for men and women. About 80% of our service users are men and about 20% are women. We have seen an increase in the number of women using our services over the last 5 years. There was a time when they would have been maybe 10 or 12% women, but now it's 20% and rising. So over the last 5 years, we've seen more people, more women turning to us for help.
And if I come again there with the male now, do you think maybe the male, is it the problems that they have that lead them to your shelters? Has it been influenced by maybe the policies, government policies, or do you think it's unemployment or family? What do you think actually happens until that happens?
I think there's two strands to it. Fazia, I think number one, it is very clearly the housing crisis. The cost of housing has become far too expensive. The majority of people using our services depend on social housing from either a local authority or from an approved housing body to leave homelessness because they are quite simply locked out of the private rented market. It's far too expensive for them. They are disadvantaged from a cost point of view, but they are also disadvantaged from the stigma associated with homelessness. So it's most unlikely that a landlord in the private rented sector, if they have 5 people in front of them looking to rent their property, that they would choose somebody who is experiencing homelessness. One, because of the stigma attached to it, but number 2, they would be dependent on rent assistance from the state, and there's a lot of paperwork involved. Whereas if I rock up with a deposit in my hand, a cash deposit in my hand, and I have a good job and good references, obviously the landlord's going to pick me. So there is a severe shortage of social and affordable housing. So what happens is people end up stuck in emergency shelters for far too long, in many cases years, and that has another knock-on effect on people's mental well-being. So that's number 1. But number 2, because we are a low threshold service, we see a lot of people who have experienced severe trauma in their childhoods, and that has an impact on their mental health in adulthood. And we did a study recently. It was called an ACE study, ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences. It's a study that originated in the United States, and basically it looks at the range of adverse childhood experiences that people in homeless services have been exposed to. And these vary from the mild to, one of your parents being imprisoned, or one of your parents having a problem with alcohol or drug use, to the extreme, which would be physical and sexual assault and everything in between. So 10 adverse childhood experiences were identified. Most of us experience 2, and we survive. But once you start going over 2, it starts to have an impact on people's behavior, on their mental health. And in our emergency shelter at the time, 90% had 7 or more adverse childhood experiences, and 10% had all 10 of the adverse childhood experiences. And that kind of forced us into saying, well, obviously there's a breakdown in government policy here, because there's nothing being done to address that. And when people do have to access mental health services, which are very poor in this country anyway, and drug and alcohol addiction programs, and they do so without the people running those services being aware of these adverse childhood experiences and how they impact on people. So quite often the treatment is doing nothing. And so, one of our advocacy campaigns is that the government ensure these services adopt a trauma-informed approach, where the mental health services in particular and the alcohol and drug addiction services as well approach clients from a trauma-informed point of view. In other words, that they would take into account the person's adverse childhood experiences.
That's true. Actually, when it comes to the government policies, then it trickles down to the person who is at the bottom. So you have talked about what was this? Like you see, like when it comes to the unemployment, and maybe somebody is working and still can't pay their rent. So in your organization, you will have people that are working but still homeless, right? Like they are working poor. What do they call? Is it working poor people?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, we wouldn't use the term poor ourselves. But yes, we do have a number of people who are working, who cannot afford either a deposit for private rented accommodation, who cannot get the time to search for private rented accommodation, and because there's such a demand for it, that is a consideration, or they simply can't afford private rented accommodation. And to give you an example, there was one person who was working a night shift and then would come to our day service during the day to try and get some sleep on the sofa. and might catch 3 or 4 hours sleep, and then would do a 12-hour night shift, and that would continue for maybe 6 days, and then he would end up sleeping rough on the 7th day because the day service is closed and he needed to catch up on his sleep. We had another person who cycled 20 miles to their job every day and 20 miles back because they had to go well beyond the city to be able to afford the rent. They had to cycle because I think their starting time was at like 5 or 6 in the morning and there was no public transport available. So they are the kind of additional challenges that people have to face. And quite often it is what's known as the gig economy or 0-hour contracts, where people don't have full-time status in their employment, so don't have access to the same health benefits and sick pay and all that kind of thing. And they're basically, in many cases it's week-to-week working, but in some cases it's even day-to-day working.
So based on that, how long then would someone stay? Like, if they came to your organization, how long will they stay there for? Like, would you have to look for a place for them to, like help them achieve what they want to achieve, like getting their own places?
Yeah, well, I mean, ideally we would like people to have to stay for no longer than an emergency. So we believe it should be extremely short term. In reality, we have people staying for months and in some cases years on end. Now, they would be the most challenging of cases. All of the support services available would be brought to bear and they would have access to them. But again, it comes back to the availability of suitable and affordable housing. And that's been in extremely short supply for certainly since 2008 when the economic crash happened. But we would argue it was even before that our social and affordable housing program in this country has fallen well behind other countries since, the 80s.
And so, like, if somebody was in your experience, would you support people who give money to people who are homeless, like who are maybe in the street? Like, do you support that? Like, if they help them, like give them money on the street, or you will actually prefer them to just bring donations then, and then maybe that will attract the people on the street to come in the shelters rather than staying out?
Well, obviously we would encourage people to donate to our services, and people would say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? But, if a member of the public chooses to give somebody begging on the street money or not, that's their own decision and that's their own business. All we would say is, if you give somebody begging money on the street, the chances are they are going to either, buy alcohol with it or buy drugs with it, and consume them, and they'll be back on the street the next day. What we would say is we usually approach people from a harm reduction approach, and that is to say we would always work with the individual to reduce the harmful effects of their alcohol or drug use. And that is a very clear program. It's proven to be very successful, and it is all about making sure the person realizes the damage to their own health and well-being they're doing the more and the longer they consume alcohol and drugs. And that's an effective approach. And we would say that's a much better approach than perhaps feeding somebody's habit.
I understand that. So thank you so much, Paul. And if I may ask, is there something that maybe you want us to concentrate on as we are doing the project? Because this one is going to be posted to the whole group. And every week we are going to post pictures in the social media, maybe Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We'll see which one we are going to use, but I will let you know in advance when that starts anyway. But is there anything that you want maybe us to do more, in the project?
Well, all I would say, Fazia, is about a year ago we started a campaign to encourage the government to hold a referendum on a right to housing that it be put into our constitution. Because quite often some of the measures in our constitution are preventing any improvements to our housing system in Ireland. We are one of the few countries in Europe that does not have a right to housing enshrined in its constitution.
Okay.
And we believe it will have a huge impact on every person in the state, not just people experiencing homelessness. It is a basic human right. I'm happy to say that this current government has accepted the need to hold a referendum, and we would be pushing that it happen sooner rather than later. And we are continuing to work towards that goal. So I think whatever is happening or whatever you're doing, that message is out there that everybody has a right to a home they can afford, and the sooner it is enshrined in our constitution, the better.
Okay, yeah, that is very good. Actually, I will send this to my lecturer, and we'll see what we can do about that. Maybe we might have a survey or stuff, and then we'll pick it from there then. And what I'm going to say is thank you so much. I was so nervous, but yeah.
Thank you, Fazia, and thanks for your interest.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Best of luck with the project.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, bye.